From the beautiful Missouri Ozarks, it's P.I.D. Radio. Welcome. I'm Derek Gilbert.
I'm Sharon Gilbert, and we are once again coming from our back bedroom.
Mm-hmm.
This will soon stop.
Yes, we've got...
Lynn is coming over today.
An adventure later today as we assemble some office furniture, some chairs and stuff for the barn. We'll tell you more about that before the end of the program.
We will indeed. Like I said, our good friend Lynn Shepard, who is very, very good about working with tools.
Knows her way around
a toolbox.
Yes,
so she's going to help us put together lots of furniture that we were going to repurpose, and we're still going to use a lot of used things, but you guys were generous, so we bought a few inexpensive things that just need to be put together.
Found things on sale, and so we will take advantage of that.
It's that time of year, so yeah.
And so that will be our Saturday afternoon, but in the meanwhile, we'll try to make some sense out of what's been going on in the world over the last week. Since last we came to you, of course, in fact, the last Saturday's P.I.D. radio was a little bit somber, and I think this one will be as well.
It will be as well, and one of the biggest things we need to ask of you is that you still pray for Tom Horn.
Mm-hmm.
Dr. Thomas Horn is in hospital.
Yeah, ICU, critical condition. Last update from the family as we're recording this on Saturday morning was about 12 hours ago, about 9 p.m. Central Time in the U.S., that Tom is resting comfortably. He's been getting more rest, which is good because before he entered the hospital on Tuesday morning, in the middle of a heart attack, they got him there just in time because they found a 100% blockage of the artery leading into his heart. Mm. He hadn't slept for about 72 hours at that point because of the pain.
Right.
So he's more comfortable now, but his heart has not regained full function.
Right. They did put a stent in that artery. Coronary artery occlusion is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
That's how your heart is nourished and given oxygenation through those arteries. So they're very, very important. But pray that the Lord will work with his heart muscle, with the cells, with the vessels, and clear the fluid from his lungs. There was fluid on his kidneys early on. I think some of that is better, but he is struggling. But, Tom, he doesn't want to stop serving. Right. He will go to be with the Lord when the Lord calls him, and Tom will rejoice. But Tom wants to work.
He does.
He's still working. He keeps giving Joe instructions.
And talking about book research from his hospital bed. He did that when he was in for COVID as well.
Mm-hmm.
So
yes, he did.
That's the mindset and the spirit of Tom Horn. So your prayers for not just Tom, but for Nita, for Joe, Donna, and Allie, their children, their grandchildren, very much appreciated.
Very much so. So, yes, and thank you. Many of you have already been praying, so thank you. Mm-hmm. If you want to know a little bit more, Derek did a special update yesterday for the 5 and 10. You can find that at the 5 and 10 channel on YouTube, but also it's been posted to Facebook. Right.
And essentially it was what we just told you.
Yeah,
so I don't really know much more other than the update that Joe put out on Facebook last night at 9 p.m. So there's really no news that we have that we can share at this point. Just requesting your prayer.
Yeah, we do. So in Israel, boy, that's the big news right now.
This has been a really interesting week, not just in what's been going on on the ground, which is interesting is not really the right word. I think horrific is a better word. But the reactions to it from all quarters is telling. And I don't want to be mean-spirited or throw shade on anyone in particular here, but I'll just say this. I think a healthy criticism, or rather skepticism, of the media is wise. Because we can look back over history at... Remember the Maine got us into the Spanish-American War. Turns out that was not the work of, it was just coal dust that ignited.
Right. Discernment in all things.
Right. U.S. government narratives that led us into World War I and the Vietnam War were also untrue.
Yes, but let me say, and I think I know where you're going here, and I just want to stop because I don't think now is the time to unpack all of that.
No, my only point is this. We know that we need to be discerning when it comes to the mainstream media, but don't go so far in the other direction that you disbelieve everything.
There's Joe. He's always coming in.
No, it's someone else.
Oh. Joe manages to get through, and I'm glad he does, especially now. But sometimes, How does he do that?
I don't know.
How does he do that?
We found that even though there are certain people on my favorites list, because if there's an emergency, I want them to be able to get through.
Like your mother.
You, my mother, my sister, my daughter, our daughter.
When you're on Do Not Disturb.
Right. So those are the only calls that should come through. And yet Joe's texts manage to get through the block.
They do.
Yeah.
Well,
his
we
kung
love
fu
Joe.
is good.
He is good.
Yeah. So, but anyway, just to sum up, believing nothing from the corporate media is just as unwise as believing everything.
Mm-hmm.
You have to discern the chunks of truth in the stew that we are served.
There is only one capital T truth, and that is the Lord God Almighty. He is truth. Human beings and spirits that are fallen have a tendency to twist things around according to our own ends.
Mm-hmm.
But as I say, it's very likely that there's something just wrong with certain aspects of what's going on now. But now's not the time to start throwing those accusations. And yet we're seeing it all over the place.
So many, there's so much out there on social media in the way of corroboration of what's been reported regarding the atrocities committed last week Saturday in the early hours, the early moments of this new conflict, that it's I think it's beyond question right now that the worst of what has been reported, probably 80% of that is true,
if not more.
More. I'm trying to be conservative and recognize that we're in the middle of an information war as much as anything else. And there are agents provocateur on both sides, disinformation, misinformation agents on both sides trying to put out a story for the purpose of rallying public support for their particular position. So this is, again, what I mean when I say we have to discern what is true. There is something I try to ask whenever I see a story or something on social media for that matter. Number one is it true? But number two is, who benefits if I believe it?
That is a great question to ask.
Yeah, because that is behind a lot of what is put out on social media. Now,
cyber war is not only hacking other people,
right?
It's using propaganda,
right? So that is something that we have to negotiate. We also need historical context. 25 years ago, and I've told you this before, when we first met Avi Lipkin, and having seen his programs on Prophecy Watchers and seen some of his presentations and so forth, I thought, this guy's radical. Because I was coming from a mindset that had been shaped by the corporate media over decades before we ever met Avi, and before I ever did any reading on world history, but specifically on the history of relations between Islam and the West. When you start reading about what Islam really believes and how it's been lived out especially since the death of Muhammad. I mean, at the time Muhammad died, his armies had conquered Arabia. But within 100 years of his death, they'd conquered all of North Africa, all of the Middle East, almost all of what is now Turkey. They'd crossed the Straits of Gibraltar and conquered all of what is now Spain. They'd conquered Iran, a good bit of Afghanistan, and gotten into northern India. That is not a religion of peace. That is a religion of conquest. And yet I see people on social media saying, well, it was a creation of the Roman Catholic Church. No. The church in Rome didn't have that kind of power then. It really wasn't until about 800 AD when Pope Leo crowned Charlemagne and then kind of elevated the status of the Roman Church by declaring itself the one who bestows kingship from heaven onto a human ruler, which is really an old Sumerian pagan idea.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. Not enough time to get into all that.
Right. But historically speaking, the relations between Islam and the West have been framed by violence. And we in the modern world, and me growing up, didn't think so because we'd not been taught that history. So over the last 25 years, having educated myself to that, when you look at what happened over the last week in Israel, it's shocking, yes, because it's astonishing to think that any human could do these things to another human, but it's because we're not wrestling against human opponents, principalities, powers, cosmic rulers over this present darkness. This really is a spiritual war.
Which brings us to what we actually do, P.I.D. Radio. If you're brand new, P.I.D. stands for Peering into Darkness. We try to find the spiritual cause behind the effect within the material world, and oftentimes we see that effect in the form of nation against nation, which is what Jesus said we would see, and historically we have seen tribal warfare over and over and over, and that's essentially what's going on here.
Mm-hmm.
So I was looking this morning to see what the spiritual history is in Gaza.
Mm-hmm.
We have quite a number of references to Gaza and Ashkelon and that whole Mediterranean strip area in the Old Testament.
Mm-hmm.
And none of it's good with relation to Yahweh. In other words, those who lived there practiced religious rituals that were contrary to anything Yahweh ever commanded.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, they were all the things he commanded against.
It's not unrelated, but when we read the end of sort of a summary of the wars of Joshua
Mm-hmm.
for the conquest of Canaan, his war was summarized as being directed against the Anakim in the hill country of Israel and in Judah, and wiped out all of the Anakim. Only in Ashdod and Gaza and Gath did some remain.
Mm-hmm.
Those were the Philistine territories. Well, obviously what's going on over the past week is centered in Gaza and the Gaza Strip. Ashdod is now part of Israel, but that region is the very heart of what is going on and the violence that is being waged against Israel.
Well, we all know about the various biblical references to the worship of Astarte or Baal in what we now call the Gaza Strip, Palestine, ancient Palestine. That area was Christianized, many of them, in the 1st, 2nd centuries AD.
Right.
And by the 4th century AD, Saint Porphyrius was the bishop. And if you read his the story of his life, you see that he sought permission from Constantinople to take down the pagan temples.
Note that he sought permission from Constantinople, not Rome.
Exactly.
Which is my point exactly regarding...
Thank you. Yes, he did. Now, he took down, with permission, he executed this decree in May of 402, so the very early 5th century. 8 temples were taken down. Aphrodite, Hecate, the sun, Apollo, Kore, which is another name for Persephone, Tyche, and also the Marmaon, which is the temple of Zeus Marnas. Sorry, Marnas, not an N. Marnas. Boy, when you get to be my age and you see certain fonts, they just look like... Yeah, the Marnaon was the temple of Zeus Marnas. Now, you may be sitting there thinking, I've never heard of him. Well, oftentimes these epithets, second names, were given to describe the attributes of a particular god. Zeus Marnas was Dagon.
Now, I'm reading an article, scanning it because I just discovered this just before we came in this morning, by Edward Lipiński, who wrote very, very influential paper on the abode of El, identifying Mount Hermon, but also in earlier texts, the mountains of Armenia as the abode of El, which is significant because, as I wrote in the Second Coming of Saturn, when you identify El as Enlil, but also the Hurrian deity Kumarbi, who was the creator god of a people called the Hurrians, who occupied what is now the Kurdish territories, northern Syria and Iraq. They originated near the mountains of Armenia, in other words, the mountains of Ararat.
Northern Syria and Turkey.
Northern Syria, northern Iraq, sorry.
Oh, so
southern
yeah,
Turkey.
You said northern Iraq, and that kind of threw me.
The Kurdish regions.
Oh, okay. For some reason, I thought the Kurds were also in very, very southeastern Turkey.
Yes.
All right.
So all of that area was Hurrian back in the day, but they originated on the plains of Ararat, below the mountains of Ararat. So if you identify El, I mean, that's just more identification that El was their god, Kumarbi, who was also Enlil, who was also Dagon, who was also Molech. It's all same entity.
So
different
Zeus, names. Who was the storm god.
But this is the but. This is the but.
This is it.
Lipiński says that the identification by Porphyrius and Stephen of Byzantium is incorrect.
Oh.
Yeah, that it was pseudo-historical and that there was no Phoenician connection between Marnas, or is it Marnas?
M-A-R-N-A-S.
Yeah, Marnas and Dagan, which I think is interesting. Now, I would not be surprised that it was actually the identification of Dagan.
Because they worship Dagon.
Right. Who, again, is this entity, El, Kronos, Saturn, Kumarbi, etc.
So when Greece came in, they just, flipped the switch.
Right. And the Philistines, we know, also were active in the valley northeast of Aleppo.
Bekaa?
No, not Bekaa. That's southeast. It'll come to me. Yeah. But anyway, there was a small kingdom there around the time of David and Solomon called Palestine or Walliston. Same people, but basically from the Aegean. The meaning of the word Marna, according to, he does say that there's an inscription to Zeus Marna that was found in the Horan, Hauran, which is in ancient Bashan, basically. The name is attested in Nabatean inscriptions of the Horan. The name appears to come from a patronymic meaning to grasp or to grab. The word Mare, M-R apostrophe, is Aramaic or South Arabian and means Lord.
Well,
yeah. I'll scan through this as we keep, let's see. Okay, point 1.4, he does say, Marna, the Syro-Canaanite god Dagon.
Well,
there we are.
Okay. Boom. I know that in the 20th and 21st centuries that the opinions of the older experts, the textual experts, it has changed. That opinion has changed slightly, and some believe that these histories are pseudo-histories, that the history of Porphyrios is a pseudo-history. But it's easy for us to nitpick, oh no, what did they know, 1,500 years ago?
Yeah.
Nothing.
I think what he was saying is that the etymology that was put forward by Porphyrius was incorrect, but he does, I'm just skipped to his conclusions here, Marna is Dagon, which makes sense because that's where the Gaza Strip, during the Philistine time of the judges, was certainly the chief deity there was Dagon.
And I think that it's very possible, again, this is just me this is my opinion, but when the Greeks came in, generally when the conquering culture comes in, they will take the local god name and either change it or append it in some way to coordinate and reflect their own pantheon.
Right.
The head of the Greek pantheon is Zeus.
Right. They and this is really not surprising that the Philistines would do this. The Dagon is not just a Philistine deity. Dagon was the chief deity of the Amorites who lived along the Euphrates River long before the Philistines settled in the Gaza Strip. Dagon was worshipped in the middle of the 3rd millennium BC at Mari, which is on the Euphrates where the Syria-Iraq border is today, but also at another city in the north named Tutul, which is close to Raqqa, where the Islamic State had its capital. It's on the Euphrates near the border with Turkey. So that whole region along the Euphrates in what is now Syria was Dagon territory. In fact, Sargon the Great in the 24th century BC, when he went from Akkad, which is near where modern Baghdad is, and conquered all the way to the Mediterranean Sea, he stopped and sacrificed to Dagon and thanked Dagon for making it possible for him to conquer all this territory.
Mhm.
So this is a very old entity, and that was the whole point of the book, The Second Coming of Saturn, is that you can trace him back to these people who came from the plains of Ararat. He was worshipped as the creator god of the Mesopotamians, Enlil, but by the time of Abraham, he'd been demoted to the netherworld, which is how we wind up equating him with the head of the Titans, Kronos, Saturn, banished to Tartarus, but also as Molech, the one who demands the sacrifice of children, and as the destroyer who comes out in Revelation 9.
Yes. Now, this is one of the things I find so interesting about the idea of Zeus Marnas. If Zeus Marnas was supposed to represent Dagon,
Mm-hmm.
Dagon, being Shemyaza,
Right.
Saturn,
Mhm.
Kronos, is not Zeus.
Correct.
In the supposed stories, the myths, Zeus is Kronos's son.
Mm-hmm.
They are not, no, that's all a lie. They're not father and son, but they are not the same entity.
Right.
One is in Tartarus, one is walking the earth, walking up and down, seeing whom he might devour.
Mm-hmm. Well, again,
In other words, that's Satan.
yes, right. And the story that was given to the pagans about, old dad had to be overthrown and sent down to was to explain what had happened to the old gods after Yahweh, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, banished them to Tartarus.
Yes, it's also a way of getting rid of Yahweh.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Oh, I'm the one who did that.
Let's retell the story, but write Yahweh out of it.
Mhm, fake news.
Yeah.
It's all fake news. So this is the pagan history. Now, I mentioned other temples, Aphrodite, Hecate. Those are both representations. Kore, Persephone. Persephone is a dying and rising grain goddess.
Mm-hmm.
The idea here is that she is married to Hades.
Mm-hmm.
Unwillfully, she was kidnapped. But she has a great deal of power in the underworld. Aphrodite is Inanna.
Mm-hmm.
Hecate is an aspect of Inanna.
Mm-hmm.
Persephone is an aspect of Inanna.
Yeah. Persephone is Kore. That's just a different name.
Yes,
for the
exactly.
Same entity, right?
I just mentioned that.
Yep.
Apollo,
Mm-hmm.
well, he's a very interesting deity in that he's all that in a bag of chips. He is supposedly part human, depending upon the myth.
Depending on the myth.
There are some myths that claim he has a human mother.
Okay.
But there are others that say no, he had a
Divine mother.
Yeah,
but,
divine mother, lower order divinity, but a
Right.
divine mother. In other words, a spirit mother.
Mm-hmm.
Again, this is all fake news. That Apollo, I'm not sure that Apollo is actually, I can't remember what Apollo is called, forgive me, but Apollo's twin sister
Artemis.
is Artemis,
Yeah.
who is Inanna.
Right.
So in a way, this is representing Dumuzi and Inanna.
Mm-hmm.
Even though Dumuzi wasn't Inanna's sibling,
Right.
they were sort of a couple. And the Dumuzi part, rising and dying.
Mm-hmm. Adonis in the Greek pantheon
Adonis.
equated to Dumuzi.
Yes, exactly. Who mourns for Adonis? That
Right,
famous poem by Lord Byron, I think.
Mm-hmm.
This is sort of a picture of the worship history of this region.
Yeah.
Now, it doesn't mean that this region stands out relative to the rest of Canaanite lands. Canaan, the sons and the descendants of Canaan,
Mhm.
Canaan, they tended to worship all sorts of deities.
They did. And you made a really interesting observation that I wish I had known before. Well, maybe it is in the second coming of Saturn. I've reached that point where I can't remember what I wrote and
can't
what's in the book
remember
and what's not.
That's why I have to reread
I'll have
my
to look it up.
books.
But the name Anakim, there's a belief that in Hebrew it derives from a word that means long neck. And so the Anakim were really tall, and so they're long necked. It's actually derives from a proto Greek word, wanax or anax, A-N-A-X, which means high king, as opposed to basileus, which means lower king.
Mhm.
So you've got a bunch of basilei and then one anax.
Mhm.
Agamemnon in the Trojan War was the onyx of the Greek.
Mm-hmm.
Zeus in the Greek pantheon was considered the onyx, and then the lower kings were Basileus, which is, as you mentioned, where we get basilisk.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway,
and basilica.
And basilica. Oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. Anyway, Anakim were then people of the high king. And who then would be the high king of the Anakim? We look at the Ammonite pantheon, the neighbors, one of the neighbors of the Israelites to the east in what is now modern-day Jordan, around Amman, Jordan. Their chief deity was named Milcom, which just means king.
Mm-hmm.
Scholar within the last 10 years did a study and determined that Milcom was just their title, king, for the chief god of the Canaanites, El, who was Kronos, Saturn, Molech, Kumarbi, Enlil, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This entity that we're talking about, Dagon, was the high king of their pantheon. So I'm wondering, and you're the one who pointed this out, is it possible that the Anakim were worshiping El? I think that's very possible because we see this, the Israelites returning to this worship again and again. The golden calf, I would argue, was, I used to think it was devoted to the moon god Sin, and that's possible because the crescent moon looks like a pair of bull's horns, and Sin's, one of his epithets was the frisky calf of heaven.
Mm-hmm.
But the main epithet of the creator god of the Canaanites was Bull El. And when Jeroboam split the northern tribes away from the tribe of Judah after the death of Solomon, he set up golden calves at Dan, which is at the foot of Mount Hermon, the abode of Bull El,
mm-hmm.
and Beth El, the temple of El. The Israelites kept being drawn into the worship of this particular entity, so the worship of Dagon by their next door neighbors, the Philistines, shouldn't be a surprise. Same entity, different names. And Marna, this deity who was worshipped in the classical era, according to Edward Lipiński, between 450 BC and about 450 AD, so well into the Christian era, which is why the bishop of Gaza, Porphyrius, was wanting to destroy the temple.
Well, here's what's really interesting about the name Canaan. This is the son of Ham, and he was cursed by Noah. Cursed be Canaan because of Ham's behavior. So all of these tribes descend from this one cursed individual. The name probably means lowlands, but there's another aspect to it in Phoenician. The name in Phoenician actually refers to purple. The fact that they made this purple dye that was valued throughout the land,
right,
and that made them great merchants. It also refers to a merchant.
Yeah,
I think it's fascinating that you see that the descendants of Canaan, depending upon this, and especially in Phoenicia, that this idea of ruling the world through economy, merchants. Nabu, exactly.
Hermes, Mercury.
Yes.
Yeah, in fact, the word Punic or Phoenician is just from the Greek meaning, if I'm not mistaken, from the Greek meaning purple. Or is it Luvian? It's another word that means, I'll have to look it up now.
Might be Luvian.
Yeah, I'll have to look that up. But it also is based on that, the purple dye that they got from the Murex snail. So yeah, I will look that up and confirm that, because I hate putting stuff out there that I'm not right about.
That's the downside if we ever do things live, and we're hoping to one of these days, because there is a sort of a momentum to that.
It is from the Greek. So Canaan or Canaan from their language, meaning purple, but also the same in Greek. And that's why when wearing the phrase wearing the purple means royalty, because it was really expensive. You got to crush a lot of those snail shells to get a little bit of dye.
So expensive. That's why most of the colors back then tended to be yellows or beiges or browns. That's why when Joseph was given a coat of many colors, it probably had purple and red in it, which were expensive.
Very expensive. That is also why in Ezekiel 28, which is the prophecy or a polemic against the king of Tyre, Phoenicians, there is the reference to in the abundance of your trade, you were filled with violence in your midst. Oh, you were filled with Hamas in your midst. Oh,
You just had, yes, I know. It's like no, it didn't. Why did, has that always been in there?
Yeah.
You just had a wonderful conversation with Carl Gallups, and you were talking about the situation in Israel and the fact that Hamas means violence.
Yeah.
And the very first occurrence of that is in
Genesis 6, verse 11, which is ironically God leading up to the flood of Noah, because the earth was filled with Hamas.
With violence.
And yesterday, according to the former co-founder of Hamas, a guy in exile, calling for a day of Al-Aqsa flood. Yeah.
I know. The irony is not lost on me.
Yeah. Well, we will continue our discussion here. Essentially, this, as we're talking here, I'm inclined to title this week's episode "The Dagon War."
Yeah, there you go.
This Marna, Dagon, was the city god of Gaza.
You also get into the Lebanese aspects of this, and that they worshipped Melkart.
Yeah. So we'll continue peering into darkness as PID Radio continues.
Hi, everybody. Believe it or not, this is October, and that means you get a brand new GHTV special offer.
We're approaching Halloween, the time of year when the world around us is focused on ghosts and goblins and devils and demons.
But they're real.
They're real, and we'd like to give you good information about those entities with our October special. First, our book Veneration, where we analyze the ancient cult of the Nephilim, the origin of demons exposed in this book. Vicki Joy Anderson's important book, They Only Come Out at Night, about night terrors and sleep paralysis.
You need this book at home for your kids and grandkids. Trust me, it is a great book.
And 7 hours of audio interviews with the late Dr. Michael Heiser about the nature of the unseen realm.
Oh, this is a collector's disc.
It really is. Altogether, these 3 items purchased separately worth $65 during the month of October, just $35 plus shipping and handling. Take advantage of this because this is good, solid, scholarly information, especially the content from Dr. Heiser.
It is, and particularly this month, you want to be armed with the truth when your family asks, what about witches? What about wizards? What about these things at Halloween? What do we do with this? It's a time to teach.
Absolutely. Take advantage of our October special offer. Veneration, They Only Come Out at Night, and The Unseen Adversary, yours for just $35 plus shipping and handling only at gilberthouse.org/store. Welcome back to PID Radio. I'm Derek Gilbert.
I am Sharon Gilbert, and we're so delighted that you choose to join us every week. We have so enjoyed getting back to doing PID Radio. It was the first thing we ever did. It was inspired by our writing. We were supposed to be promoting our books, and that lasted a week, and then we decided, okay, let's talk about something else. But it has forced us. We're both news junkies by nature, but it's forced us to really look at the spiritual truths behind the mist of war.
It is, as you termed it, theopolitics, which I think is a brilliant term that really applies here. If you're wanting to know more about the history of Islam, there are a couple of gentlemen who I've interviewed a number of times on A View from the Bunker. In fact, I'll link those in the show notes. You can go back and listen to those. Dr. Timothy Furnish, who got his degree in Islamic eschatology and breaks down the difference between what Shia Muslims believe and what Sunni Muslims believe. And then Raymond Ibrahim, who's an historian who's written several excellent books. His 2 most recent, I think, are just masterworks that should be required reading for anyone who's a little confused about why this fighting is going on. Didn't this all start in 1948? Wouldn't it just be solved if Israel restored the 1967? No, it would not. It would not. We've got 1,400 years of history to explain why that is the case. So Raymond's books, Sword and Scimitar and Defenders of the West, excellent reads, easy reads, and yet well-researched. Because he can read and speak Arabic, he goes back and reads Islamic historians, some of them writing contemporaneously with the men and the events they describe. So texts that are 1,000 years old, and he can Okay, here's what they were saying about what they were doing back in the day. Don't take your opinion of what was happening 1,000 years ago from a modern Western academic who's probably a Marxist. Mm-hmm. Most modern historians writing about, like Karen Armstrong has written a couple of very popular mass appeal histories of Islam. And I was reading one of her books, just trying to familiarize myself. Okay, what are others writing about, Islam? And I got to where I was laughing because Karen Armstrong, who is again, she's a mass appeal author writing about the history of Islam and making excuses for Muhammad. Mm. Well, they had to start raiding caravans and killing and raping, because how else are you going to make a living in 7th century Arabia?
What?
Okay.
I'm sorry, but that is not an excuse for doing that.
Right.
Even back then, human beings had a moral compass, right, supposedly.
Yeah. Well, Muhammad made it, he sacralized the act, and so it became a holy calling. Anyway, Raymond and Tim are excellent resources that will open your eyes to the nature of the religion and its relations with the West.
Well, as we're talking about what's going on in the Middle East region, I'm just seeing this at X, which used to be called Twitter. U.S. Civil Defense News shares this amongst other places that are sharing it. Russia conducts airstrike on U.S.-backed terrorist base in the Syrian territory of Idlib. It's interesting that this is a proxy war between Russia and the United States in many ways, in Syrian territory. The U.S.-backed terrorist base, well, Assad and Russia see them, the freedom fighters, if you want to call them that, the rebels, as terrorists.
Yeah.
The name the word terrorist, that label is transferable depending upon your context.
Right. Part of the information war.
It is absolutely.
One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter.
Right. So the fact that this is now going on in Russia, I think, let me just really quick.
And those rebels in Idlib province are some of the ones that we were sending weapons to, the so-called moderate rebels that we were diverting weapons looted from the stores of Muammar Gaddafi before he was overthrown by NATO,
right,
during the Obama administration.
Yeah, my point is that this is not isolated to one region of Israel. Mm-hmm. We're seeing Lebanon getting involved. Mm-hmm. We're seeing now the ramping up of the proxy war in Syria. Protests all over the world for the quote-unquote hashtag Day of Rage, that and the Al-Aqsa flood. That began yesterday. And ironically, as we are talking, I'm looking at the time and it is now 10:13. 10:13 a.m. Yeah. Well, 10:13 local time in Albuquerque and other cities across the U.S. that sort of span that southwestern edge of the U.S., those cities were privileged to watch an annular solar eclipse. Mm-hmm. That doesn't mean once a year. It means it's just this ring
that would
of
be
fire.
Annual. Yeah.
It just means circle. It's this circle of fire around the sun because it's not it's not total. So just the central part of the sun is blacked out. And that's probably still ongoing because it takes a couple of hours to begin and end. But next March...
Yeah. We're not going to see it here, by the way. It's all cloudy. So
no, even if
it's just going to get dark.
We wouldn't see it here anyway.
We're going to get about 60% of it, so we're going to lose about half of our sunlight.
Boy, that's not according to what I saw online. But anyway, I digress. I start again.
I could be wrong.
Well,
we'll find out in the next hour.
Okay, we will. We will. And our good friend Judd Burton is right there in one of the prime areas to watch the entire eclipse. In March of next year, there will be a total eclipse that is viewable from larger parts of the U.S., Dallas up through the Illinois area, southern Illinois. It's that eclipse that forms the other leg of an X right across the United States. The X, the first leg of it occurred in 2017, I think, when we were up in Boise, Idaho. And this will be the other leg of it. And I think that Hear the Watchman is having a conference in Dallas during that eclipse.
Yeah.
Dallas is one of the cities where you can see it.
Mm-hmm. And so Hear the Watchman will have been in both of those over the last 7 years. Because what was the other one? 2017.
Yeah, I think it was.
We will be in Israel when it goes on. We pray.
Well, you will be in the conference speaking by video. You are pre-recording.
You'll see my picture on the poster. It's we will be there, but I'll have a video presentation. But
yes, speaking of Israel, I'm glad you brought that up, and the fact that we plan to go to Israel next year. We're still planning to go. Mm-hmm. And if you have signed up to go with us to tour Israel and possibly go into Jordan, understand that we are not postponing that. Not yet. Not at this point.
Haven't even thought about it
because as far as we're concerned, this will end soon. If we are wrong, and if by Christmas it is still going on, and I pray it is not, because this is killing and injuring many, many people on all sides. Mm-hmm. And the innocent people on any of these. I'm sorry, but these are human beings.
Yeah.
And their peace, their livelihood, the children. The children especially.
Yeah.
The children especially. You need to think about this. So pray for everyone in this, but if this is still going on at Christmas, then we will revisit this question with Aaron Lipkin.
Right. In the meanwhile, we're just praying for our friends over there. So far, they are all safe. It was interesting. I sent a note to the archaeologist we spent, better part of a day with at Gilgal Rephaim, Dr. Mike Freakman, and just said, pray that you're well and for a swift recovery. He sent back a picture and made it, it's clear from the picture that he's been called up as in the reserves. Mm. All able-bodied young men and women serve in the IDF, other than the Haredim, the ultra-Orthodox, but they're all also subject to being called up to the reserves when needed, and Israel's called up about 300,000. So here we've got an archaeologist who is, he's still pretty active, but it's clear that he is past his active duty days.
Well,
he's probably late 30s, early 40s.
There's a 93-year-old gentleman who signed up again. And
he's in uniform, and he's got a weapon, but his responsibilities will be encouraging the younger soldiers as an inspiration, because he's a guy that...
He was there in 48.
Yes, as a very young man, he would have been there during the War for Independence in 1948. So that is his responsibility. We got word. Go ahead.
Really quickly, while we're still talking about our friends in Israel, Derek and I visited Metula with our good friend Yeshai Avital when we were there this last spring. And Metula is the northernmost point in Israel. It's a small town, if you want to call it
northernmost village, yeah.
Northernmost village,
Shabbat Farms is further north, but northernmost village. Yeah.
I stand corrected. Northernmost village. Mm-hmm. But these are people that they're within a stone's throw of Lebanon.
We're working on a video for release, and I pray I can get it out by Thanksgiving is my goal, of the pre-tour investigation that we conducted. We were looking for sites that we think support our theory that the Valley of the Shadow of Death is a real place. And that's why we were in Metula. Mm-hmm.
Because of the falls that are there.
Yeah. Where, according to the book of First Enoch delivered God's judgment to the weeping watchers. The Avel Ma'in in the book of Enoch means waters of weeping. Mm. So to get there, you've got to go by way of Metula and then come south. And as we were driving through that region, you'll see on this video, a video that I think you shot through the back window of the vehicle as we were driving along the border. And you can see the white vehicles on the other side. And of course, Yeshai Avital, our guide, wonderful sense of humor, said, "See those vehicles? The Hezbollah."
We went, what?
We look closely, and you can very plainly see UN on the side of the vehicles. But that begs the question. The UN's driving along that border then, back in March.
Yeah.
What are they doing now?
Yeah, I know.
How is it possible that Hezbollah fighters are getting so close that they're engaging in firefights with Israeli soldiers?
One has to ask that question because the UN is also, I think, in Lebanon. So they are supposedly patrolling that border.
What good are they?
Yeah, one might ask. So yes, I'm sorry. You were going to go ahead and say.
Yeah. How did this happen? And this is a question that will, I think, consume Israel once the crisis is passed.
Oh yeah, we actually addressed that at the very beginning.
Well, something I meant to bring into this because there don't seem to be very good obvious answers. Israel is supposed to have the best intelligence sources, services in the world. So between the Mossad and Shin Bet, how is it possible that Israel was caught flat-footed?
Well,
and we.
I was just going to mention the fact that some of the Hamas fighters who have been found on their bodies were papers that seem to indicate that this incursion was planned a year ago in October of 2022.
Right, which just adds to the number of questions.
It does, but it's also possible that was propaganda that was planted on them just in case. I have no idea.
Right.
We have to really be discerning about everything right now.
And as we've seen, the media outlets that have been reporting on it, like Sky News yesterday was reporting on these documents and saying, look, we can't confirm, but it does look like they're legitimate, but we cannot confirm 100% that these documents are legitimate. Now, there was an interview given by an exiled Hamas official in Lebanon to RT, Russia Today,
right,
claiming that this had been in the works for 2 years and that only a small circle of Hamas commanders and Hezbollah commanders knew about it to try to keep it away from Israeli intelligence sources. They relied on low-tech means of communication. In other words, none of this was communicated over over cell phones or the internet. It was all handwritten or typed communications. It was all on paper, low-tech.
Right.
That goes back to Osama bin Laden, 30 or 20 years ago, ostensibly, how they were able to fool American intelligence. Okay, maybe all that's true. Wall Street Journal reported this past week that Iran's hands were in this, that Iran financed it, helped Hezbollah and Hamas coordinate it, and gave approval for the attack 2 Mondays ago. The U.S. and the Israeli government officials are saying we don't know that for sure, probably to avoid what would come next if they said, yes, Iran was definitely involved, because then the next thing would be people saying, okay, go get him. Why aren't we going to get him? But here's how we were told by a young man who says he's got a source in intelligence services. Stefan Caraway of Fig Tree Watchers Ministries called yesterday and said, yeah, you can, give my name. He can't name his source, obviously, but what he was told was this. Israel had gone to depending on computer aggregated, AI-controlled surveillance of the Gaza border, rather than having soldiers in towers looking at scanning the horizon to see if there was anybody.
School.
Yeah, old school surveillance methods. And I suppose you can understand why. Those towers are up there. They're isolated. They're vulnerable to snipers, to drone attacks, and so on.
Easy to become complacent.
Yeah. When the things have been fairly quiet for the last couple of years, and again, this Hamas official talking to RT said that was by design, to fool everybody into thinking we were actually worried about governing the people of Gaza. And through a combination of hacking and basically shutting down the AI, or at least confusing the AI that was controlling the monitoring systems, and then hitting the cell towers that they needed to communicate one with another, and then hitting the observation cameras, knocking them out, suddenly the sensors that were part of this AI-controlled surveillance network along the border was blind. And that's how the bulldozers and front-end loaders and the motorcycles and all that were able to get across the border before Israel reacted. Now, all right, that may be true, but just stepping back, wouldn't there have been some kind of an alarm when all of these sensors suddenly went offline? You'd think that would have been an alert in and of itself.
You would think so. And also each village, each kibbutz has someone there who reports directly to the military if something were to happen.
Yeah.
So I don't really know. I see all sorts of opinions. I'm seeing opinions that say Israel knew about it, that this is a setup, a false flag. There's so many things, right? And it's too early to tell. The fact is people are dying.
Yeah.
And that's what we need to pray for. You mentioned Iran, old Persia. It's in the Bible as Persia.
Yeah.
Ali Siadatan, who is a good friend of ours, you've interviewed him a number of times. He grew up there. He has family there. He knows the mindset. And he has told us, because the dissatisfaction with the Ayatollah and with the mullahs right now is leading to a vacuum. Many are coming to Christ.
Right. And that is good news in all of this.
Yeah.
He tells a story about several years ago going back to visit family there, and the younger men. He said there was a baby boom after the war with Iraq ended, and the surviving soldiers came home and they started having lots of children. So he said, 70% of the population of Iran is under the age of 35?
That's young.
Yeah, it is. It's really contrary to what we're seeing in the Western world, where we are getting older and older as
Western world and China.
Yeah, and China too. Yeah, China just had just saw this story yesterday. I flagged it to talk about on Monday. The record low number of births, even though they've lifted the one-child policy. It's difficult to turn that trend around, especially as the population gets older. It becomes more difficult to have babies, even if you want them. So, but in Iran, they've got a lot of young people, and in talking with, he lives in Toronto now. So he's back there visiting, and these young guys are coming up to him and saying, now, wait a minute, you're telling me that we, and other than North Korea, we are the only country in the world that is isolated and standing alone because our leader has a personal grudge against the United States? And Ali's like, yeah, pretty much. So they're not liking that. The ruling Ayatollahs are getting older and recognizing that they really don't have much of a window of opportunity, which is what makes this time that we're in especially dangerous, because coming back to China, they also recognize that demographics are not in their favor. Their population is shrinking, and their pool of available men of fighting age is getting older, is shrinking. The United Nations, which has been trying to tell us for years that the world is overpopulated and we need to cut down our carbon footprints because we won't be able to feed everybody, they admit the Chinese population will drop by about half over the course of the rest of this century. They're about 1.6 billion now, and they will probably be at 800 million, 700 million by the time the next century rolls around. So China, if they're going to do something now militarily, the time to strike is now. In Iran, when you've got a bunch of the Ayatollahs who are in their 80s and 90s, if they're going to try to prepare the ground for the Mahdi, they got to do it now. And that is kind of where things are, the reason for their timing, especially with the move to normalize relations between Israel and Saudi Arabia. The Saudis are the big rival for Iran.
Oh, yes, very much so. And we could do an entire hour on what's going on in Saudi Arabia right now. Peering into darkness, the fact that we look at what the enemy is planning, the spiritual enemy, and how they're using human beings as shields and as their proxies against the war, in the war against Yahweh. The bottom line is we have quite a number of, in Matthew, in Mark, in 1 Timothy, where we are told that the gospel of the kingdom will be preached to all the world. That's our job, and that is the great promise. When we look at all of these people who are being used by the spirits and by human beings as shields, as pawns, these innocent civilians that if they were given the chance, if they were shown compassion and love, they might accept Christ. But if all they see is your fist or your weapon or your hatred, it's unlikely that they will. And this is, I think, one of the reasons we see in 1 Timothy, and without controversy, great is the mystery of godliness. God was manifest in the flesh, justified in the spirit, seen of angels, preached unto the Gentiles, believed on in the world, then received up into glory. That's our job. That's what we're to preach. Christ crucified, risen, and coming again.
Amen.
And if we do that, then we can fulfill what was promised in Matthew and Mark. And that's, I think, one of the reasons in the book of Revelation we see these angels saying, look, just send us in there. Let us preach, because these humans are really bad at it.
Yeah. Lord, what'd you create them for? They're like kids who just don't know what's important.
Exactly.
They're squabbling over marbles when they could have the kingdom.
They are. As to what's going on in Israel, it is very important.
It is.
And it may be the first, these may be the first battles in a final push in the war against Christ. Because the fallen realm know that we are living in it looks like end times, looks like he could come back any minute.
As Carl Gallup says, the most prophetic period of history since the first coming.
Yes, it's exciting. Those people who say, I wish I could have lived in the first century. Well, you are. You are.
Mm-hmm.
It's just it's the repeat of the first century.
I would say repeat of the first century BC.
Yes.
In a sense.
In a sense. But we at least know. He's come once, we know.
That's right. Over the last years, we've read more about the history of the Essenes and the history of their writings. And by the way, this is a preview of what I'll be talking about for my presentation for the upcoming Skywatch TV virtual conference.
Oh, yes. It's exciting stuff.
They saw the world in such a mess that only God's direct intervention could fix it. That was a unique worldview in Jewish society in the first century BC. The Sadducees and the Pharisees, they both thought that performing the rituals, keeping the feasts, would eventually fix everything. The main difference between the Pharisees and the Sadducees is the Pharisees believed in bodily resurrection. The Sadducees did not. But they both thought, as long as we continue the temple service and do the rituals, everything will be fine. The Essenes were different in that they said, no, the direct intervention of God himself through his, and especially the northern Essenes around the Sea of Galilee, the ones who wrote that middle section of the book of First Enoch called the Book of Parables. They're the ones who saw that a chosen one, an anointed one, the Son of Man would come and bring justice to the world. And they were looking for his imminent arrival. And I think that those who believe that John the Baptist and the earliest Christians came from the Essene community are absolutely correct, because they were primed and waiting for the Son of Man. Mm-hmm. He's here. Messiah is here. Now, they misunderstood his mission. They thought he was going to punish the kings of the world then and establish the kingdom of David then. Didn't quite understand what his mission was.
Right.
But we're living through that again as we are looking for his imminent arrival again. Just like the Essenes in the first century, it's like, look, there's some rough times ahead. And, they had to live through in that first century BC. Let's see, the Parthians invaded. There was a civil war. The Romans invaded. The Armenians invaded. Mm-hmm. And then, they had their own revolution in the first century AD that didn't go well. So don't for a moment think when we say we're waiting for Jesus' imminent return, Messiah's imminent arrival, that we think that means we can just sit back and wait. Prepare, because Jesus told his disciples while he was with us that they would all suffer tribulation. So there will be rough times. Mm-hmm. But as you said, that's not the church being destroyed. It's the church being deployed.
Absolutely. Be like Tom Horn, who is working right up until he's on machines right now, keeping his heart going.
Yes.
And we pray that the Lord weans him off those machines and gives him strength again, and he gets to go out and continue his work. But no matter what, Tom is looking at this and saying, I'm going to work every minute that I can.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to do what I've been called to do until I can't do it anymore. I physically cannot do it anymore. Boy, I tell you what, he's a warrior. That's what we are called to be, what Derek and I are trying to be. And many of you, and we just want to really thank you for the prayers for Tom Horn. Thank you also for your support and prayers for us. We could not do this without you.
Amen.
And those of you who have helped not only prayerfully, but also financially to help us to build the barn better. Mm-hmm. The barn is, as we mentioned at the very top of this, Lynn Shepard is coming over today, and we are going to unpack all of those things and put them together and try to get them all done. And
I'll have to clean up a little bit so we can shoot a little video and share that, because Again, the furniture, these are discount finds. We're not going high end on this stuff.
No, not at all.
But it's going to look nice. There's some outdoor furniture that will fit really well with that barnwood look the paneling is giving it.
And the cost was so good because it's, the end of the year of the garden season. So
right.
Things that were made to go on your deck, they're very beautiful. But
so when I sit in that chair, will I be the wicker man?
Oh, I hope not.
No, me too.
I don't. No, I don't like that.
Pray against
Won't
that.
Go that. Pray against that. Yes, but continue to pray for Tom Horn. And if you want to know more about Build Barn Better, you can go to gilberthouse.org/donate.
Mm-hmm.
And if you want to go to Israel with us and say, I'm going to stand with Israel, and I'm going to assume we're going to visit next March, go to gilbertsinisrael.com.
Mm-hmm. Join us and Timothy Alberino as we tour the Holy Land and take you to some of the megalithic sites there that relate to this long war against the principalities and powers. So, we will, just look forward to getting back over there whenever the Lord allows.
The Lord He'll make it happen one way or the other.
Yeah, and in 2025, we're already got dates set aside for 2025, the Iron and Myth Tour with Dr. Judd Burton and Pastor Doug Van Dorn. We're looking forward to that.
That's going to be incredible. So thank you for listening.
Amen to that. Tomorrow morning, the Gilbert House Fellowship, our weekly Bible study, we may do more on this spiritual war.
We may.
There's some verses that relate to Gaza, but also the Negev that may be relevant. So we'll see how we are led. And tomorrow night it is Iron and Myth, episode 22, as we talk about sorcery.
Ooh, wonderful. By the way, Derek is going to be in North Dakota.
Oh, yeah. Almost forgot to mention that. That's coming up in a couple of weeks. Give you a couple of days of quiet time to do some writing. A couple of days without me saying, honey, can you find the thing?
By then, I should have my office back, and I'll just be really jumping in there.
This will be the Pitchfork and Hoe Gathering in Valley City, North Dakota, the 27th and 28th.
It doesn't mean bring your pitchfork and hoe and go after Derek. No. This isn't a thing to do that. No. This is not that last scene in Frankenstein.
No. Yes.
No, this is all about learning better farming techniques.
It really is. It's homesteaders and small farmers getting together to discuss best practices, crop rotation, how to raise kids, by which we mean goats, and things like that. And I'll be speaking on Friday night about giants in the Bible and why they are important. And then on Saturday night, with Halloween just a few nights away, devils, demons, and dragons.
Ooh, and you'll learn how to raise goats.
That's right.
Goats!
More information on our app. You can find it on our free app, the calendar section. You can also go to the Pitchfork and Hoe Gathering page at Facebook. And until next time, I'm Derek Gilbert.
I'm Sharon Gilbert. Bye-bye, everybody.
P.I.D. Radio is an outreach of Gilbert House Ministries, released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 4.0 International License. Follow us online, PIDradio.com, Twitter @PID Radio, or by downloading our free app, PIDradio.com/app or gilberthouse.org/app. Join us each week for our Bible study, the Gilbert House Fellowship.